Hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode in the 4-part Avatar Bending comparison series on my channel. Today I'll be going over the element of Earth. As a refresher, this series is meant to provide a definitive and objective answer as to which element is the best in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Of course, no video of this kind made by a single person is free from the influence of subjectiveness, and therefore I'd like to remind you that while this series is made to be objective, opinions still do play a role, and you're allowed to feel differently than I do, of course. If that does happen to be the case, feel free to let me know down in the comment section. Before we get into it, let's briefly review the scoring system for each element. The three categories are offensive combat, defensive combat, and practical use. Each individual category will be scored out of 10. The total score will be tallied out of 30. After the last episode, the only score on the board is water, which holds a score of 21 out of 30. We'll see how Earth scores in comparison, and we can then mark it on the board. Just an FYI, there's no actual board. Now I think all the intro and refresher stuff has been covered, so let's dig into the element of Earth.
Earth.
Let's start with Earth's offensive capabilities. Firstly, the most basic move, throwing Earth at a target. This move is the most common offensive fallback for an Earthbender. While it is a reasonably common move to see from an Earthbender, something the move benefits from is the Earthbender's ability to change the shape of the projectile. Throughout the show, we see many different shapes taken by the rocks Earthbenders fire. Some examples are just a shapeless hunk of rock, a cube, a disc, and a sphere. As I discussed in the water video, water suffers from its projectiles having pretty low durability. This is not an issue for Earthbenders. While yes, Earth might not be amazing at cutting things like a sharp piece of ice might be, giant boulders are great at plowing through almost anything else. The rocks fired by Earthbenders are shown to be impenetrable by almost anything except more Earth or another Earthbender. What might seem like a defensive trick for an Earthbender also works to help boost offensive attacks. Rock armor can boost the power of an Earthbender's punches and create much more force upon impact. If an Earthbender is able to metal bend, they can create metal armor that is even stronger than rock. This does require an extremely high level of skill, but the armor is an upgraded version of rock armor because it provides more mobility. If the Earthbender wants to retain mobility and can't metal bend, they can just surround their hands with the earth. This will still give the same force of punches, but it will also result in the Earthbender having more freedom to move around, especially in their lower body. The Dai Li take this to another level by creating fully formed rock gauntlets that could also function as projectile. This gave their hands a lot of extra movement ability, which meant that they could have extra fire, or earth, power while retaining freedom of movement in their hands. Another move used quite frequently by Earthbenders is the Earth Column. This is a versatile move that has many applications in offensive combat. First and foremost, the Earth Launch. Toph uses this move frequently to get people out of her way, or to make her opponent take a fall so hard that it knocks the wind out of them, thereby incapacitating them. Opponents can also be launched off walls. Aang and Toph do this to the Dai Li agents in the episode Lake Laogai. Earth launches can also be performed by flipping up the ground and launching an opponent. This move can be more useful than an Earth Column if there are many people who the Earthbender wishes to launch, as the larger surface area of a piece of flat ground grants extra coverage. The Earth Columns can also be used to pin opponents on flat surfaces. Opponents may be pinned up, down, or to the side. Two Earthbenders working together can also attempt to sandwich a target in between columns. This trapping and pinning power can also be used with earth welding, which is the idea of fusing two pieces of earth together. In the episode The Day of Black Sun, Toph uses cuff-shaped pieces of earth to bind Azula in place after she taunts and berates Sokka. Earthbending powers also entail the ability to create seismic activity. This can be used to move other people or objects aside, which can throw an opponent off balance. This can also leave the opponent open and vulnerable to an attack, while they recalibrate their senses. It can also be used as an attack by itself, as throwing an opponent off balance on one side can cause damage and incapacitate an opponent completely. Toph gives us a great example of this in her first appearance, her battle against the boulder in the episode The Blind Bandit. She also uses that power to quite literally brush Sokka aside as he tries to prevent her from leaving the camp in the chase. There are just a few smaller abilities I want to go over before we move on from Earth's offensive capabilities. Earthbenders, and especially those who are skilled in sandbending, can throw out dust and or sand. This can be used to blind opponents or push them back. Earthbenders can also bury opponents in earth, fatally or non-fatally. A limitation of all facets of earthbending I do want to bring up is one that is similar to water's main limitation, that being the required presence of earth before bending can take place. This means that earthbenders need to have earth in order to bend, unlike fire and airbenders, who can do it at will. The reason I don't see this as that great of a hindrance for earthbenders is that 98% of the time, there will be plenty of earth available in some form. Earth is much more common to find than water, even at sea. Toph demonstrates that earthbenders can bend at sea by bending the earth at the seafloor in the episode The Serpent's Pass. This means that unless an earthbender is in the sky, they will have ample amounts of earth to bend at any time, which is why this limitation isn't as threatening for an earthbender as it is a waterbender. Taking all of this into consideration, Earth has many abilities that are similar to water, but at higher durability and more consistent access to large amounts of the element, although it does suffer a little bit from a limited mix-up capability. This isn't too glaring an issue, however, so I'm going to give Earth an offensive combat score of 7 out of 10. Let's move on to the second category of today's analysis, Earth's defensive capabilities. Earth's best bet in any defensive scenario is Big Wall. Earthbenders can shield themselves with Earth by creating a wall to absorb and deflect attacks. Depending on the force and volume of the attacks being thrown out, the Earthbender can increase the height, length, and thickness of the wall as necessary. If an attack is from an element with more fluid and flexible properties, so literally every other one besides Earth, the Earthbender can change the shape of their wall not only to block the attack, but also reroute it. Earthbenders are able to change Earth into any formation they please, which is extremely helpful for being able to block attacks from multiple angles, such as sword strikes or rocks being thrown down from a great height. The wall can be curved, angled, or even sculpted by the Earthbender in order to make the best formation to combat the attack. The Earthbender could even surround themselves with a wall to provide maximum protection. Ironically enough, this kind of defensive maneuver provides Earthbenders with an extreme amount of flexibility as to how they choose to defend against any attack. Of course, the way of the Earthbender is not to hide behind a wall. The way of the Earthbender is to take every challenge head-on with no fear. While Earth as an element requires the bender to be firmly rooted to the ground, and realistically an Earthbender could conduct many rounds of combat without moving from one spot on the ground, there are situations where combat will require the combatant to keep pushing forward. So let's go over some defensive moves that an Earthbender can use while moving. The wall created by an Earthbender could be lifted off the ground to provide a moving shield, although the wall would have to be less specifically tailored to combat one move, although an Earthbender could create a moving canopy to provide cover for a large number of people, or just themselves. Earthbenders can also destroy rocks and boulders being thrown at them with their limbs or some kind of a weapon, Aang's glider staff, for example. This form of defense is specific to a situation where Earthbenders are being attacked by other Earthbenders, but the skill is important to Earthbending. An Earthbender can also catch the rocks that were being fired at them and throw the rocks back, which doubles as an offensive move. Earthbenders can also bury themselves in the ground to avoid a head-on attack. Like I mentioned in the previous section, Earthbenders can create rock armor to surround themselves so they can stay reasonably mobile while retaining a good deal of protection. I also mentioned that metal can work well for this if the Earthbender is skilled enough. Metal is even stronger than rock and provides more mobility for the Earthbender to charge through their opponents. The last major defensive capability of Earthbending is seismic sense. This is the ability to sense the movements and locations of objects by detecting the subtle vibrations, and in Toph's case, sound, made by their motions. This move is massively useful for an Earthbender to have because it provides them not only the ability to see at all times, including in darkness, but also an increase to their field of vision, expanding it to a full 360 degrees. This makes it essentially impossible to approach an earthbender from any direction, because they will always be able to sense an approaching enemy, even if they can't properly see. Seismic Sense is the move Aang uses on Ozai to sense the final attack the Fire Lord will ever attempt. This proves its worth and usefulness in combat. Earthbending is an extremely versatile and powerful element on the defensive side, and it provides many options for the user on how to block attacks. Combining this with the unrivaled effectiveness of Earth's defensive powers leads me to give Earth a defensive combat score of 9.5 out of 10. Finally, let's go over Earth's practical applications in everyday life. First and foremost, Earth construction. This is exactly what it sounds like. An earthbender can use Earth to construct anything from simple tents and shacks to full buildings. The skill is a lot more useful and versatile than Water's ability of the same kind, simply due to the widespread availability of Earth in any given place. Earthbenders can also use the Earth launch on themselves to propel themselves a great distance in the air, although this might not be preferable to earthbenders, as the earthbending technique requires that they be rooted to the ground in order to bend, so being in the air does leave them vulnerable. Earthbenders can also skate on the ground by rooting themselves to it and propelling themselves forward. This move is extremely advanced, but does provide a more earthbender-safe method of fast travel. Earthbending can also be useful if one needs to scale any cliff or stone wall, like the one in Ba Sing Se. This can be accomplished in multiple ways. First, if it is a cliff made of rock, the earthbender can bend the earth of the cliff to make the cliff much easier to scale. If it is a wall, the earthbender can fuse a hunk of rock to the wall and then launch themselves upward, like Aang and Toph do in the episode The Drill. I don't think earthbenders are naturally granted with the ability to climb better, but these tricks make it especially easy for an earthbender to scale any type of high wall or cliff. Earthbenders can also use their earth powers to tunnel underground. Earthbenders can create simple passageways or even complex underground burrows that they could potentially reside in. Earthbenders can also apply their seismic sense to their everyday life. It can alert them of mishaps about to happen if they can sense the off-kilter vibrations of an object about to topple. They can also use their sense as an aid to be able to see in the darkness, or at any time when their eyes are incapacitated. Like I said in the combat section, this removes a major human limitation for earthbenders, and it proves to be a hugely beneficial practical application. Earth can also be used as a fire controller, either by creating a boundary where a fire may not move past in order to prevent the spread, or dumping a giant rock on top of the fire to completely neutralize it. Earth's practical applications aren't super diverse, but it does excel at what it can do. Its uses are a bit larger in number than Water's, but it doesn't have a skill nearly as overpowered as water healing. This all leads me to give Earth a practical application score of 6 out of 10. Earth's final tally is 22.5 out of 30. So far, it's an extremely close race at the halfway point. We'll have to see if Fire or Air will have enough on their side to top Earth. If you disagree with anything I've said today, feel free to let me know in the comments section. Next episode will be focused on Fire, so you can look forward to that coming soon. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more stuff from me, a like and subscription would be much appreciated. Anyways, that's all I have for now. Until next time.